Okay, everybody, thank you for your patience. I have an interview to present that is actually just a wonderful, inspiring, illuminating, groundbreaking discovery that rivals anything we've ever discussed on this podcast before. This is a damn good story. It's not just a good story. This is a revolutionary discovery, and I'm kind of amazed that people aren't really talking about this. So, a little less than 2 months ago, a paper was published in the prestigious mycological journal Mycologia with the title A Description of Two Novel Psilocybe Species from Southern Africa and Some Notes on African Traditional Hallucinogenic Mushroom Use. The paper was co-authored by Alan Rockefeller, and like any paper describing the discovery of a new Psilocybe species, it was totally fascinating. Very cool paper. But there was more. This paper didn't just describe two new species of Psilocybe, it described what I would say is the first truly compelling evidence of a tradition of psychedelic mushroom use on the African continent. Now, before getting into this, a quick pedantic note, because you're probably going to hear me saying new species or discovered a tradition or things like that. And in general, these terms are fraught with all kinds of weird associations, right? Cullen Clark didn't discover this tradition. He observed it as an outsider, and it had never previously been documented outside of this region. So he did something very important, but you have to be careful about saying he discovered a species or he discovered a tradition. These things existed, and what is actually being documented is a new cross-cultural exchange as opposed to a discovery in the strictest sense of the word. Just want to be careful there. So when I say discover, I'm speaking, relatively speaking, discovered in terms of the world outside of this community that had been using Psilocybe maluti as part of their traditional medical practices. There have been many suggestions and indications and types of speculation regarding use of psilocybin-containing mushrooms in Africa. There's been speculation about ancient Egyptian use of Psilocybe cubensis and other psychoactive mushrooms. One rarely discussed, but very interesting to me, historical dimension of this is that there's actually a mushroom that is foundational in the Bwiti Iboga religion's origin story, alternately called Duma or Duna. There has been no ethnomycological identification of what this mushroom is. I asked many Bwitiists when I was in Gabon. Many people had heard this legend. Nobody used mushrooms in contemporary ceremony, nor was there a apparent desire to identify this mushroom. It seemed in their perception to be a sort of purely mythological phenomenon. But it's extremely provocative that the two things that are foundational in this religion are the creation of this psychedelic plant and the consumption of a mushroom. This has never been fully explored. Anyway, speculation about ancient Egyptian use. You have this provocative, foundational, mythological element in Bwiti. You also have a paper by Gaston Guzman, the greatest Psilocybe expert to have ever lived, that provided some suggestion of traditional Psilocybe cubensis use in Uganda, but none of this was definitive. None of this was detailed. This was similar to most of these things where they had some circumstantial evidence. In the case of the Guzman publication, it was a family crest that appeared to have an image of Psilocybe cubensis on it. Okay, so provocative, but not exactly something comparable to, let's say, R. Gordon Wasson's meeting with Maria Sabina. But there was always a feeling that there's gotta be some history here. There's no way that these internationally distributed psilocybin-containing mushrooms were only used in the Americas, right? If for no other reason than mushrooms are edible, and historically, humans have a tendency to get hungry and eat whatever they can. And in that process, they find a lot of stuff. This is the beginning of what will likely be a much greater investigation. When you describe something this big, you need extensive analysis, more field work, corroboration. At this point, there hasn't even been chemical analysis on these two new Psilocybe species, particularly the one that was implicated in the ritual Psilocybe maluti. It's not known with certainty that it contains psilocin and psilocybin, although all evidence points in that direction. There just isn't the chemical analysis yet. And that's just the beginning of this conversation. I mean, this is some pretty damn remarkable stuff. Not to diminish the work of people like Brian Marascu in the Immortality Key, but we've become so accustomed to these very tenuous historical interpretations of the past that when we see something this remarkable, I mean, this is pretty damn amazing. A new species of almost certainly psilocybin-containing mushroom in the genus Psilocybe that also, I don't think I've mentioned this, is extremely cool looking. The mushroom itself is extremely, extremely cool looking. The people seem more excited by some kind of ancient archaeological evidence showing an ergot sclerotium wedged in a tooth than what appears to be a rich and currently extant practice using psychedelics. I mean, this is just kind of remarkable to me in so many different ways. We're acting as if all of this knowledge of psilocybin is the exclusive property of Maria Sabina, when that very well may not be the case. And I think it's far more likely that there has been a parallel evolution of psychedelic practices involving mushrooms in many different regions of the world. Probably the most remarkable aspect of this story is that Cullen Clark is not an academic anthropologist or ethnomycologist. He is an independent researcher like Alan Rockefeller. He's a curious 29-year-old who wanted to see what was out there and talk to people and documented something utterly remarkable. I think this is just the beginning of something that will likely be a new and important chapter in the history of psychedelics. So I hope you find this conversation as fascinating as I did. Okay, so this paper that was just published that you were a co-author on is an extremely exciting publication because I think it confirms suspicions that many people have had for a long time that the traditional use of psilocybin-containing mushrooms isn't entirely confined to Latin America, that there must be some African traditions associated with these species. So could you tell me a little bit about your background, how you got into this, and then how you took part in this amazing new discovery?
Yeah, sure, definitely. It's hugely exciting. It's so cool at the moment. And I'm really privileged to be a part of it and helping to tell the story. So yeah, my name is Cullen, and I am a ethnomycologist from South Africa. Maybe to backtrack a little bit, just to toot your horn, man. I was listening to your podcast with Dennis McKenna a few days ago, and you were just speaking about how he was such an influence in your life. And I think for many, many people may realize, maybe you don't, but you've also been an amazing influence. So I actually got into ethnomycology for many reasons, but one of them was after watching pharmacopoeia. And just, it was really awesome and really exciting. And it just spurred on this amazing interest in stories that weren't told. And yeah, I have many, many reasons for doing what I do, but you definitely were one of them. So thank you so much. Just starting out to give you a bit of praise.
It's wonderful to hear. Thank you. Yeah, it is. I mean, it is such a fascinating area. And so you're from South Africa.
I am indeed. So I'm from South Africa. I call this my home. This place is absolutely beautiful. My family lineage is from Scotland, though, but this is my home. I absolutely adore it here. And if I maybe just progress a little bit just into the actual story of how I got into this, because it's really, really interesting. So I don't know if you know much about the current academic standing of mycology in South Africa. It's fairly limited. The general consensus is that our traditional healers don't really use mushrooms in South Africa. It's not a really common occurrence. And whenever you speak to various academics, you're always met with a fairly similar answer, which is that, yeah, it's not a very common practice and it wasn't ever practiced. So I actually got into ethnomycology mainly to try and prove what I thought was the truth, which was that our people have been using mushrooms for many, many hundreds of years. So I was living in the Eastern Cape. I don't know if you're familiar with the Eastern Cape much. Have you been to South Africa?
Yes. Yeah, I've been maybe three times.
So the Eastern Cape is a beautiful stretch of land that is fairly unsettled. There's a lot of forest, a lot of grassland, and I found myself calling the Eastern Cape home for a number of years, probably 4 or 5 years, as we moved our company from Cape Town to that sort of area. And I would often find myself in the forest just searching for mushrooms, spending hours on end in the forest, crawling on my belly, looking for different ganodermas and various edible species that I could find. And I stumbled upon a really interesting little mushroom called Schizophilum commune. It's a little white mushroom, fairly common. I think it's pretty much found all over the world. It also goes by split gill, a nice little edible mushroom. And I remember looking at this little mushroom. Through my reading, I'd known that people had consumed this mushroom in Central Africa. It's fairly common to eat this mushroom. And I was wondering to myself, do our people use this mushroom? Do we eat them? And I went and scoured through the literature. This was, before I even had started any of my work. I scoured through the literature trying to find some information around just indigenous use of Schizophilum commune, because I thought it was a beautiful little mushroom, and I could not find anything. There was no information. And, living in the Eastern Cape, I got to encounter quite a few different indigenous healers and sangomas, our version of a shaman or diviner. There's also nyangas, which are like medicine men. And I had seen firsthand experience of people using this mushroom and many, many other types of mushrooms. So I sort of thought to myself, this is so interesting. Why has no one documented that our people have been using this mushroom and many others? So I set out from that day when I was up on that hill and I looked at that mushroom, and I set out on a journey for about probably 5 years in the making, just traveling all around South Africa, thousands of kilometers into the most obscure little towns, speaking to as many healers and diviners and sky herders and just anyone who wanted to talk to me, just to try and document as much as I could on the indigenous use of fungi in our Southern African tribal people. So that's a quick synopsis. There's a lot more to that, but that's basically how I got into it.
I'm so happy to hear that, first of all, because it's something that isn't even talked about. And I think that there's an unfortunate misconception in science and maybe culture more broadly, where people think that what has been documented is reflective of what is.
Exactly.
So you see this tremendous amount of scholarship surrounding Maria Sabina, and you come to the conclusion that Maria Sabina was the greatest mushroom shaman of all time. And this is not to say anything against Maria Sabina. By all accounts, she was an amazing and, of course, historically incredibly influential person. But there's also a degree of randomness to it. She happened to be the person that Wasson met with, who taught Wasson about psilocybin-containing mushrooms, but there were likely many other people in that region who had their own philosophies and their own spiritual connections to mushrooms who just weren't part of the story. And so much of this exists but hasn't been documented because of distrust or because of racism or because of fear of oppression or any number of things. A history that's very easily lost. And one of the major mysteries, I think, in ethnomycology and maybe even just more broadly in mycology is what has been happening in Africa. It's a place that clearly has the entire continent, not the entire continent, but large swaths of the continent are clearly very good for growing mushrooms. You know, you go somewhere like the DRC and it's clear that are probably thousands of undocumented species because people just haven't done the work of studying them in the same way that they have in Mexico. And I'm really happy to hear that you're doing that work because it clearly needs to be done.
Amazing, man. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's hugely exciting. And I sometimes wonder what would have happened had Watson come to Africa instead. I mean, it was obviously closer to go to South America, and there was already an understanding of psilocybe use down there. So had things played out a little bit differently, we would have maybe been living in a very different environment or climate to understanding the history of fungi, because that is what I'm trying to unravel here a little bit. And my story goes really deep and it's really exciting. And I hope we have enough time to talk into it because I think you might find it quite extraordinary. But yeah, that maybe brings me to the second point in terms of like the study of this and traveling all around the country. It's very broad and I'm trying to document as much as I can on all sorts of different fungi. So that extends from various Ganoderma species, you know, the reishi mushrooms, to various psychoactive species and edible species, and even microfungi as well. Potentially some penicillin alternatives that people use. There's some blight fungi that are used as poisons. There's really so much to document. And that's just like one of the parts that I stumbled into was used for this paper, which has allowed us to cement Southern Africa as the first area where people have been documented to use psychedelic fungi in a tribal setting, which I think is really exciting. It's very cool. That's on Africa, on the African continent for that. So yeah, my studies have allowed us to sort of cast a bit of a spotlight on the story that needs to get told. And I'm really privileged to have been a part of the amazing paper. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, if you squiz through it or not.
Oh, I certainly have. Yeah. And extremely exciting on many different levels.
Amazing. Do you want me? Can I tell you about it? It was very cool.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
actually
Yeah.
completely by accident.
I would love to hear as much as you want
Amazing.
to share about even the work leading up to this. Of course, I'm primarily interested in psychoactive mushrooms, but I love mushrooms in general. And, you know, anything about a different culture's relationship with mushrooms is always fascinating to me. So yeah, I'd love to hear everything about how you got to this place. Soren bought some ketamine from a dealer.
This is some crazy shit. You fucking muppet. This ketamine's spiritual, if you know what I mean.
Not knowing what that meant, Soren decided it would be prudent to send the sample off for analysis by Kykeon Analytics. He goes to kykeonanalytics.com and sees that their list of analyzed research chemical samples from vendors around the world shows a dizzying array of different compounds with different degrees of purity. Recognizing the danger of consuming an analytically uncharacterized chemical, Soren pays $20 for their simple qualitative analysis, puts the sample in a bag, seals the bag in an envelope, puts 3 stamps on the envelope, addresses it to Kykeon Analytics in Spain, and sends it off. 7 days after receiving the sample, Soren received his results, and now, thanks to Kykeon, he's able to proceed, illuminated by the understanding that chemical analysis affords. And you can do the same. Go to kykeonanalytics.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I went to Lesotho with an idea of what I wanted to try and find, and that was to just try and document the Basotho people and what mushrooms they do use. I had no idea of what I would find when I was there. And it just so happened that all of my friends in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, we were all planning a hike and we were choosing where do we want to go? What do we want to do? Because every year we try and do like a 60 to 80 kilometer hike through the wilderness, being like the Old Transkei or Limpopo or wherever we're looking to go. And it just so happened that we had all decided Lesotho would be a great place. And Lesotho is the highlands It's sort of cornered off on all sides by really high mountains. The Drakensberg to the southeast, if I'm not mistaken. It's a really beautiful, beautiful wet place, really high up. And we decided this was going to be the place. And we set out in December on a hike through central Lesotho, just following this river trail down from our starting point. And it was just extraordinary, the most beautiful place. I'd really encourage you, if you like hiking, if you like being out in nature, it's extraordinary. You feel like you're on top of the world, and the people are just so kind. Yeah, just in general, Southern Africa, the people here are just really extraordinary. You find some really wonderful people here that are just so open with knowledge sharing and with taking you in and providing insights. So we're in Lesotho, and we're hiking, and I was harvesting mushrooms for all of my friends. We would eat every single night some different agaricus species and all sorts of different mushrooms. And on New Year's Eve, believe it or not, we had stopped off at this sort of resting point. Up until now, I was gathering information along the way for my research. Just every little village that we stopped at, I would go into the healers' huts and just ask them. Some of them are a little bit weary at first, which is rightful. You know, who am I to come in and ask them questions? We did have a wonderful translator named Aviva that was helping me at that time. And I would just talk to various people and sit there for like hours on end, trying to, learn a little bit and get some information. And everything was going really smoothly. I'd learned about different puffballs and, various Phalinus mushrooms that were growing up that side, but nothing psychoactive. I actually had no idea that there were any psilocybes growing up in Lesotho. And it just so happened that on New Year's Eve, on the 31st of December, we had stopped off at this area where we were going to just wait, and some of my friends went into this little shebeen, like a little bar, to go and buy some beers for the evening, and we are going to have a party. And I just walked off into this field and was just taking it all in, just soaking up this amazing scenery that I was looking at. And I stumbled into the most extraordinary little patch of these just wonderful looking psilocybes. They were so unique in their morphology. And I knew exactly what they were as soon as I saw them. I just had a feeling that this was a new psilocybe, just because I had never seen one like this. I picked a couple, and I had some signal on my phone. So I sent some photographs to some of my friends on the Mycological Society of Southern Africa, which I'm a part of. We all just got talking about it, and it was really, really exciting. And I harvested a couple and didn't think much about it. When I was walking the next day, I was like, this has to be something that the people know about. And for the next couple of days, Aviva and I, with help from another traditional healer named Betsy, just got to work trying to find out as much as we could about this little mushroom and what it was being used for. Did it have any importance in the culture? I think just, starting out, just finding this amazing little mushroom in Lesotho just was a godsend in its own right. Like, just encountering something of this nature was so much fun. Little did I know that I would stumble upon an amazing treasure trove of knowledge just waiting to be discovered. So Betsy and I, we set out Aviva as our translator. And just to quickly catch you up, so Betsy is trained as an Inyanga, which is the medicine woman, not really a diviner or like a soothsayer, not someone that would consult with the ancestors as believed down here, but someone that would just apply natural medicines and help people overcome ailments. So Betsy was a good foot in the door. Having someone that is of Lesotho origin really helped when I wanted to talk to these people. So we set out and we tried to discover what this little mushroom was used for. And we found that the local healers, the Sahona, if I'm not mistaken, that's what they call their diviners, were actually brewing this little mushroom up into a psychedelic beverage, which is very cool. I wish that I would have tried it there and then, but I was a little bit fearful. I had just come off of a really high hero's dose, probably like 8 months prior, and I was a little bit fearful of going back to that space. So I actually didn't try them. But what these diviners were telling us was just in perfect alignment with what I knew, which was that they were accessing these transcendental spaces using these mushrooms. So they would make a beverage, a brew, they would brew it for many hours on end in some lukewarm water, and then it would get hotter gradually, and they would keep it at this heat. Sometimes they would add in some other plants, like the Bushman's poison bulb, which is bufone, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, they would make this beverage and consume it. Then the diviner would sit in front of a mirror, which they would call sipone. A mirror is what you would use to sort of look into the other realm, essentially. And they would then, either they themselves would get information that they could use to help cure or diagnose an ailment from the patient that they're treating, or they would give it straight to the patient, and then they would interpret for the patient what was happening. The patient would explain to them what they were seeing, and then they would interpret it, which is very, very cool to me. That's really wonderful, because we see cultures all around the world using mushrooms in a very similar practice, which shows that somewhere down the line, this knowledge was passed down. Yeah, and the cool thing with my research as well is that we got an indigenous name. So every time I try and find a mushroom, I try and get the indigenous name as well. So we document like a full monograph, I think it is, just to outline the full usage of this mushroom. What's its name? How is it brewed? Are there any recipes that we can try and get? And we got all of that, which is fully documented. There's actually a lot of things that we had to leave out of the paper. There were so many other extraordinary things that I found, but it wasn't really in alignment with what we're trying to show in the paper.
What did you have to leave out?
Well, there was sometimes this mushroom is ground down. Well, firstly, have you seen the mushroom? It's so cool looking. It's got this like slender little cap. It's very elongated. It's very cool looking little mushroom. It's almost like a bishop's cap to me, like the hat of a pontiff or someone in the church. Side note. So they would grind down this mushroom, make a powder from it, and then the healers would make small incisions on the abdomen of someone suffering with cramps or someone that was struggling with gastrointestinal upset. So that was one case.
And they would put the mushroom powder in the incision?
Yeah. They would put the mushroom powder in the incision, exactly.
Wow.
That's actually a very common practice in Southern Africa. We see that with other varieties as well. You have it with quite a few different types, usually softer species that, the chitin isn't as hard as like some saprophytic species, some bracket fungi like Ganodermas or Phelinus mushrooms. So yeah, they would just pack it into the wound, essentially. I would be so curious to see if there's any benefit garnered from this. Well, that was just one of the types. There was also more esoteric use where you would basically use this mushroom to ward off evil spirits. You would use this mushroom to protect your home. This mushroom is used like very widely for many different practices. And I think that's just attributed to the fact that it's so special to them. The only other mushroom that maybe is used as much is Podaxis pistillaris, which is a very interesting little mushroom that grows out of termite mounds. That one has a very magical use case as well. So yeah, I think that shows huge reverence for this mushroom, that they use it for all sorts of different ailments and maladies.
These days, alternative cannabinoids or altnoids have become increasingly popular. You may have heard about THCP or THCV, but have you heard of THCB? The butyl. Over 86% pure THCB isolate. That's impressive. This was just a year or two ago, a trace oddity that people only speculated about. Now we're living in the future. You can get THCB on the internet. If you're listening to this right now, you can just order THCB. What a time to be alive. Can you imagine? You can just order the butyl THCB from canaclear.com. Use the promo code Hamilton. You gotta cherish these moments while they last, because one day you're gonna wake up and the government is gonna have decided to protect you from THCB. They're gonna step in to save you from THCB.
And to take a step back, you mentioned on this first night it was the night, right? Or was it night? Or just...
So I'd found them in the day.
No, in the day. You'd mentioned that the first time that you saw them, you recognized that it was a new Psilocybe. But I think, as you mentioned, this is an extremely weird looking fungus. It doesn't look like any psilocybes that I've seen, and I'm not a mycologist, but I don't think I would have even considered that this was a psilocybe. I probably would have thought it was some kind of copernellus or something like that. What was it about this mushroom that even made you think that it would be a psilocybe?
So it's obviously Coprophilus. It was growing out of dung. And in and around it, there were also other, I don't want to say they were cubensis because we didn't test them, but they might have been natalinensis. I think that's how you pronounce it. Our local species, very closely related to cubensis. Very, very telltale sign of psilocybe. They looked identical to cubensis, but unfortunately I can't say that they were because we didn't test them. And they were growing in and amongst these mushrooms as well. Okay, let me actually backtrack here, Hamilton. So I didn't know immediately it was a new psilocybe, but I had a feeling because it just had such a cool aura about it. It was completely golden. The cap was completely golden. There was some bluing down at the base. It just had some hallmark features of a psilocybe. I was hoping that it would be, definitely, and it turns out it was. So I didn't know immediately, but I had a feeling. I think I was more hoping that it would be.
It's really an amazing looking mushroom. I mean, I guess you looked at the taxonomy and the genetic analysis. What is even the closest relative? It's Psilocybe maluti. That's how you pronounce it, right?
Maluti, yeah. Maluti.
Yeah.
So Maluti is that mountain range in Lesotho, and Maluti can translate to it can mean from the mountains or the mountains. So yeah, we wanted to give it credence to the place that we found it from that area. When it came to actually sequencing it and running the genetics on it, the co-authors that were on the paper with me were just extraordinary. I'm by no means a scientist or an academic. I would like to be. I would like to be in that club, but I didn't go and study. It just wasn't for me. I couldn't do it. I self-study everything. So I love chemistry and I love, rudimentary chemistry, not up to your level, but chemistry and mycology. And if I find an interest in something, I will go into it. So the actual taxonomy and the sequencing of it was done by Brayton and Alan Rockefeller. And they basically looked into it. There is a close variety. Let me actually check. I can't remember what the closest variety was, but I think it is a couple marks away from cubensis. It's not as close as you would think it would be. I think it's quite a unique variety in its own right.
Yeah, I'm just blown away by all of this. And maybe I missed it, but in the paper, nobody appears to have done chemical analysis of it. Am I wrong?
No, we have not, but that is definitely in the pipeline. We are wanting to get it checked for psilocin and psilocybin and baeocystin and all of these things. So I currently have a culture sitting on a slant, and we are looking at what we can do to try and cultivate it and get it tested. But the legalities here are still quite iffy. It is still, we would classify it as a Schedule 7, if I'm not mistaken. So on par with some really, what would you call them, like hardcore addictive substances, I'd imagine, which is just insane. But hopefully within the next couple months, we can get it tested, fractionated, and look at its compound content.
So as of this moment, it's not even known with certainty whether or not this contains psilocin or psilocybin other than the reported visionary effects and the bruising.
Exactly. So there's still so much to discover. This is the wonderful thing about where we are at with mycology in South Africa. If you want to go down in history, come to South Africa and find some mushrooms. They're pretty much everywhere. And if you find them, get them tested, and you'll be probably one of the first to do it. There's really not a lot of people picking up the mantle or holding the flame aloft. So it's very exciting. You are seeing a lot of younger people that have an interest, starting off and doing it, but it's a slow grind. So I'm fairly familiar with most of the people in South Africa that are trying to push the envelope of doing this, but we're still very far behind, and it's hugely costly to do it. Luckily, I've made some good friends with several universities, so they're definitely helping out. And then I get to co-author papers, which is exciting.
So you're cultivating it as we speak. Has anybody successfully fruited it outside of its natural environment?
No one yet.
Wow. But you have the mycelium growing.
We do indeed.
Damn. That is so exciting.
I will keep you in the loop as soon as we know more. The growing conditions are quite unique because of its high altitude and the cold there. It was during the summer months, so we're trying to just replicate that as closely as possible. But yeah, we'll see in the coming months what comes out of it. I definitely can't wait to write some more information about it. I've got some cool colloquial names that I want to give it if we can cultivate it and grow it out.
Just to get into a little bit more detail for people that aren't mushroom hunters, take me through the workflow of something like this. So you're in the field, you see this mushroom, you realize this is not like anything I've ever seen before. And looking at the habitat and the surrounding mushrooms, you start to think this might be a psychedelic mushroom. So take me through the next steps. You photograph it, you start talking to people. How do you go from walking around in a field to co-authoring scientific publication? What are all of how the community comes in? You mentioned talking to the South African Mycological Society, but I would be curious about just all the different steps that go into the creation of something like this.
Sure. So various different people all taking up different responsibilities within the endeavor. So from my point of view, this was the species that we found in Lesotho, and photographs were taken immediately. And those were the photographs that were used in the paper. And me and my friends picked a couple immediately. The best place for drying, if anyone ever wants to dry some mushrooms out in the field, is just pop them on your dashboard. It's a very common thing that mycologists do. Is just get in your car and pop them on your dashboard. If you don't have that, just in like a paper bag until you can get them dried would be a good solution. As soon as you're cutting oxygen off completely, they're going to start to sort of precipitate, would that be the right word? And moisture will form and they'll start to mold quite quickly. And then the other fungal spores that are on them, because they can be quite contaminated with various other fungal spores, they can start to take over and it can degrade your DNA and it can make it a little bit more difficult to sequence them. So yeah, that would get them in fairly good condition quite quickly, and yeah, send them to the university. They know how to do everything. So Brayton is amazing. As far as I know, there's quite a process to undertaking that you would have to clean the culture. You would have to try and take a viable tissue sample from either internally. Usually the gills are a good place to go for these sort of species with the closed cap. It's quite a nice spot to look at. If you can try and get viable mycelium, that's also really cool as well, because then you can grow it out and you can clean it up on a plate, on a petri dish. And then when it comes to actually sequencing, as far as I know, they sequence the IT band. What's it? The ITS band, I think it is, or something like that. But
ITS, yeah.
Yeah, that's not my area of expertise. I'm so sorry. I wish I could tell you more. It's really not my area of expertise. I like being in the field. I like going and talking to people, and I like interacting with individuals that know more than me, and I can just learn from them. So I wish I could tell you more of that part of the story. What I can tell you, though, is just the amazing discoveries that we have found in South Africa that will sort of blow people away and hopefully solidify South Africa as a mycological nation, or an ancient mycological nation. And I think this is the start, showcasing this mushroom species and the long history of use of this mushroom species, because this isn't a new thing. Speaking to the various Basotho healers, is that this mushroom knowledge was passed down from their gogos, or their teachers, and their teachers before them. And it goes back several generations. So as far as we can push it back, I think this would probably be a several 100-year-old practice of using this.
It's so fascinating. And I think that there's a tendency when something like this is discovered to project our own preconceived notions about these sorts of experiences onto other cultures. So for people in the United States, when they consume a psilocybin-containing mushroom, the purpose is to have a trip, to have a sort of maybe religious, visionary experience oriented toward psychological self-exploration. And it's easy to assume that any other culture that uses them would be doing it in approximately the same way. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, when you look at some of the anthropology surrounding psychedelics, what you often find are things that seem almost unrecognizable by our standards in terms of psychedelic experience. One example would be that I often encounter reports of traditional use oriented toward finding lost objects or something like that,
Yes.
where you think, what is that?
It's so true.
That is the last thing that I would ever consume a psychedelic to achieve. And then when you go back further, you even have potential use in sacrificial rituals, maybe as a form of purification before sacrifice, maybe as a sort of ordeal that somebody has to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, you have applications like what you described with the introduction of the mushroom powder into a cut where it seems that the medicinal effect isn't even about the psychoactivity, at least directly, that it may be used for a completely different purpose as an anti-inflammatory or antibacterial agent or something of that nature. So one of the things that really stood out to me in this paper is that you described that this psilocybe is being used in conjunction with buophony, which is a deliriant plant that produces a sort of scopolamine type effect that is considered by most people to be very undesirable. In the United States, nobody would ever think they should combine psilocybin containing mushrooms with a deliriant plant because that would interfere with the comfortable self-exploration and would turn it into something more of an ordeal that would be much more challenging and painful and potentially dangerous. So did you get a sense of why this is being done, how it was being treated? Is it a spiritual experience? Why would they be doing this traditionally?
So not entirely spiritual all the time. So sometimes the brew is made on its own with just water and the fungus. And other times it's combined with various different herbs. And they might actually be for different reasons. The preparation is usually done when the patient comes in, and the traditional healer will then decipher what they want to put with it. And I know firsthand that it's not always used to gain enlightenment or to understand the situation. Sometimes it's used exactly like you say, in more magical settings. Like there's some recipes where you combine the mushroom with, it's very common to combine it with fat of an animal, in this case, python fat or snake fat. And you would use this in order to try and bring your money back, like to get money back from someone that owes you money. So I think that this mushroom would be used as sort of a carrier, like a catalyst for other things. And you would just add it into the brews that you're trying to create in order to accomplish a desired effect. So yeah, I think when they're taking the mushroom beverage on its own with just water, it's usually to decipher what the patient is struggling with. So in traditional African medicine, you can either go to a diviner, a sangoma, and that sangoma will, before choosing to give you a herb or a bark or sometimes even animal, they believe that there's a reason why an ailment is inflicted upon you or why you have a malady that you're struggling with, and it's usually related to an evil spirit, or that someone has hexed you or bewitched you, or perhaps even that your ancestors are displeased with you. And the whole purpose of the sangoma is to try and figure out what is the cause of your affliction, like where is it coming from, fix that first, and then as like a final token to help you through whatever you might be struggling with, be it cramps or whatever, here's some extra herbs that you can take. But it's usually to try and figure out what is causing you this. So perhaps even psychosomatic, like or psychoanalytical, to try and figure out what's causing you this issue first. Whereas with an Inyanga, you're going there just to heal an issue like the common cold, or perhaps even liver degenerative issues. There's a lot of liver issues that people deal with over here. So that I've seen more use by sangomas or sehole in Lesotho, they call them. They would use this mushroom much more, and they would apply it with other things in order to try and gain some insight into the situation that you're dealing with.
This podcast is also brought to you by Lucy Nicotine, a company that makes nicotine pouches, nicotine gum, and nicotine lozenges. I particularly enjoy the apple ice flavored nicotine pouch. It is a refreshing and well-formulated product. If you don't already use nicotine products, I recommend you don't begin. They're habit forming. But if you do, I think this is the finest nicotine product on the market. Thank you, Lucy. And in case this isn't already obvious, warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It certainly makes sense. And did you have a feeling that there was a distinct appreciation for the psychedelic type experience that the mushroom produces? Because by mixing in the buophony, you're going to dramatically alter the nature of the experience. And you could use it as a sort of what I find in a lot of traditional practices with plants and fungi is that plants can serve almost a symbolic effect as well as a direct pharmacological effect. So the morphological characteristics of a plant might be just as important as the chemistry of that plant. Does a plant, this is very much the case when you look at the ethnobotany of Bwiti ritual. Many of the plants are being used not for their medicinal effects in the strict sense of the word, but because something about that plant carries a symbolic association that is integrated into the ritual. Maybe it's because the plant looks like a seashell, or because the plant is associated with resurrection or something like that. Was the feeling that this was a symbolic thing, or that there was a direct appreciation of the psychedelic effect that this mushroom?
There was a direct appreciation for the psychedelic effect in this case when consumed on its own. And that is directly linked to the name that they give it, which is Keoalaquaba. And then when you make the beverage, it's Keoalaquaba Sepone, which is mirror. But mirror doesn't necessarily mean like just to look in a mirror. A mirror is a gateway, a portal into another world. So I think there's definite reverence for the actual mushroom and where it can take you. I think that is quite transparent in how they use it and how they revere it. So that would be the starting point, is that they would use it to access these transcendental spaces. And then I think because they have such reverence for it, they just combine it into other mixtures as well to ward off spirits, and they would put it by their door, or they would put it into the incisions. Yeah, it's quite similar to what we call it here, Ispindi, and Ispindi is the Ganoderma variety. The Ganoderma variety is also used for many different issues in South Africa, but in the Eastern Cape, it's primarily used first and foremost for the initiation ceremony of young boys going from childhood into manhood. And it's quite an interesting practice where they grind up the mushroom. It's quite a woody, hard mushroom. Have you ever held a reishi mushroom before? It's quite strong.
Oh,
quite
certainly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's quite a woody mushroom, and it's ground down. I had some of it applied to me. It's a very interesting sensation when it's quite like coarse. It feels a little bit like charcoal when it gets applied to you, but it's applied to young boys after circumcision, after they go through their initiation ceremony. And it's believed that they can't become men until they go through this ceremony and have the reishi applied to them. And this is its first use case, but then it's also used for all sorts of different other things because it has such high esteem in the tribal setting. So I think the same thing is happening with this mushroom, is that it's seen as it's revered, and then it has various other uses underneath it that it's then applied to.
And back to the name and the use of mirrors in the application of this mushroom, this is something that I find extremely interesting. And I remember when I was first becoming really interested in psychedelics, one of the kind of pieces of folk psychedelic teaching that you would sometimes encounter, people would say, don't look in the mirror.
Oh, yeah.
You don't want to look in the mirror. It's going to be crazy.
Sure.
And I remember, of course, thinking, well, I would like to try that. And smoking DMT while looking at my own reflection and becoming aware that this really did have an amazing effect. It's some of the most amazing experiences I've ever had have involved the use of mirrors. And, you know, this is traditionally been used in some meditation practices. There's even a term for it, catoptromancy. And I was really excited when I learned that this was also part of traditions surrounding iboga in Gabon. There's also use of mirrors and understanding that mirrors can be harnessed to alter the nature of the experience. And, in terms of kind of simple environmental modifications, this seems to be one of the most powerful tools, maybe second only to something like music, in terms of helping change the nature of the psychedelic experience. And you observed this, correct?
I did. It's very interesting. I mean, I've also tried it as well. It's quite terrifying at first when you do look into a mirror, and then you sort of start to settle into it, and it does change the experience quite dramatically. Yeah, so this is a prerequisite for them, is having the mirror presence, is to then use it as a tool in the ceremony. So I'm not too sure. I would love to try it and see what the effects are with this particular mushroom. Yeah, I unfortunately didn't try it, but it was a prerequisite for them to have this mirror presence. And the brew then has the name of the mirror inside of it. So again, very specifically choosing their names so that perhaps in the future other people know exactly what to administer and how to administer it with. I think the actual full name, Keo Alakwaba, is a very interesting one. It was told to me by Betsy, and it means the crow's cigarettes, or the cigarettes of the crow, because often they'll pick them from the fields and it's like they would have them sticking out of their mouths and it looks like the crows are smoking cigarettes. This was told to me. I don't know how true that is. Maybe it's just a story that was told and it stuck, but I thought that was quite interesting. So yeah, the mirror in the name and in the practice is a definite must that you have to have. So I would love to try it at some point in time just to see if there's any effect.
And were you invited to try it? Was there an openness to you participating in a ritual like that?
No, unfortunately not. I think there is a bit of a hesitancy to partake in certain practices. There's some instances where I've been accepted wholeheartedly and been allowed into people's houses and sit down with them and their children. And there was once in Hogsback, a beautiful area of South Africa, that I got to go into one of the medicine men's houses and sit down with his whole family and just discuss with him for hours on end. Usually the discussions happen out in the fields and stuff, but this was quite special for me. I've been into a couple of houses, but sometimes I get to partake, sometimes not. I think also I didn't ask because I was hesitant. I had a very heavy mushroom experience that changed my life quite dramatically. Very difficult, but really incredible experience. And I was coming off of that and still trying to integrate it into my life. And so I chose not to pursue or push. So I think had I asked, perhaps things would have been different, but it just wasn't the right time for me to do that, unfortunately. But also good. Maybe it was the right thing just to be present and listen.
I ask not because I, think that you should have. I'm more curious about whether there was a sense that this was a ritual that was reserved for specific applications that you would be ineligible for because, for example, you don't have evidence of liver failure or you're not cursed in a specific way, or was there a feeling that this was reserved for very specific applications, or that this was something that could be employed and was more frequently employed for anyone that might wish to do it?
I think that it was fairly widespread. The usage is a fairly common thing. I don't think that there's a holding on to the knowledge that certain people can try it, or maybe you could only try it if you are afflicted with a certain condition. The speaking around it, the way that they were referencing it and talking about it, is that, you can fairly easily come off of the streets and approach anyone that is certified in this or that is practicing Sangoma and get treatment. I think it's more used to divine, to try and get understanding of perhaps what you're struggling with in your life. So that wouldn't be closed off to most people. That's just the feeling that I got around it. yeah, it wasn't held with such reverence that only elders could take it, or only people that are being initiated into the healing arts or whatever. Yeah, I think it's a fairly common practice to use it, actually.
Oh, wow. This is really all so fascinating. And then the other aspect of this, it's very interesting, is when you look at the history of psilocybin containing mushrooms and Maria Sabina, it's endlessly controversial. It's almost absurd to see the degree to which Sabina has been used in different ways. People see her as a poet, as a spiritual figure. People see her as a victim, as somebody who is terribly exploited, as someone who is lied to, as a cautionary tale. There's almost no end to these different interpretations. And one thing that has struck me, because I've been to Huautla de Jimenez 3 times, is that there is this dramatic difference between the way that you hear Maria Sabina being talked about, psychedelic conference where some academic in the humanities is presenting their latest research on the exploitation of indigenous knowledge, and typically projecting her as some kind of person who is terribly harmed. And I think the kind of contemporary appraisal of all of that is that everything that happened with her was bad, that it was unethical, that R. Gordon Wasson is a bad man, that he introduced her to terrible risk by publicizing these rituals in Huautla de Jimenez, that he lied to her, that he exploited her, and that the later extraction and chemical characterization and synthesis of psilocybin by Albert Hofmann was done without any approval by the indigenous groups. And these conflicts and these interpretations are very much not something that I have observed when I've actually been to Huautla. Typically in Huautla, what I've seen is a more pride would be probably the word that I would use to describe. Certainly not a sense of exploitation or something terrible having happened. There is a awareness that this, in this somewhat isolated city, that this is the thing they are best known for. This is the thing that brings outsiders to them. There's a very small sort of tourist industry surrounding it. And there's a museum for Sabina. And there's a pride in someone of such tremendous international influence having come from that community.
This podcast is also brought to you by matcha.com. Grab a traditional matcha bowl or your favorite mug and enjoy a hot cup of matcha first thing in the morning. I don't drink coffee, but I think matcha is a wonderful way to start the day. It contains L-theanine, it contains caffeine, which is what I'm most interested in, and it has all sorts of purported health benefits. Matcha.com was founded by psychedelic pioneer Dr. Andrew Weil. All of their matcha is imported from Japan and third-party tested for heavy metals. It's delicious, probably healthy, and certainly stimulating. So enjoy a cup of matcha from matcha.com.
Where do you think this stems from, that our westernized mindset is that we've done wrong by these people? Where do you think that came from?
It's a complicated question because on one hand, you do have a indisputable history of terrible biopiracy and exploitation conducted throughout history, where any time there was a traditional medicine or resource that could be exploited, it was. Obviously, probably you have examples like rubber. When you look at that, there's a shame associated with it and a desire that I think most well-intentioned people have not to repeat the mistakes of the past and to behave in the most ethical possible manner going forward. My concern is that sometimes you can go too far in the other direction, where you are projecting attitudes and concerns onto indigenous groups that may not actually exist, that are born out of guilt and a desire to prove that you're different from your exploitative ancestors. So there's a
Sure.
now, especially, I think there's a feeling that it's bad for outsiders to go and to document indigenous practices because it is potentially exploitative. But in my own experience, I've never seen a possessiveness surrounding these substances. For example, in the Bwiti Iboga rituals that I participated in Gabon, it was actually very much the opposite. There was a direct pressure for me to bring knowledge of their religion to the rest of the world. You know, they explicitly gave me Iboga fruit and said, plant this, spread this, make this available. They wanted people to see the beauty of their religion. And
Yes.
it was maybe something of a minority opinion, but I certainly did encounter people saying, well, what did you give back to these people? And there was an assumption of exploitation, not recognizing the fact that the people in this community were incredibly proud of their tradition. This wasn't a sense that I was taking from them. It was a sense that this was an opportunity for them to show the world this beautiful spiritual practice that they had cultivated, in the same way that you could go to a church in the United States and say, I want to make a short documentary about your church. And probably in many instances, people would be very happy to have somebody communicate what they do because they believe in it. And I think your paper is going to have a really big impact. It's going to, especially now with more interest in psilocybin and psilocybin containing mushrooms than ever before in history, I think that people are going to use this research that you've done in all kinds of different ways. If, for example, people start going to Lesotho and trying to participate in these rituals and a tourist industry emerges, that will become controversial. There will be questions about indigenous reciprocity. If anybody begins to sell spores from Psilocybe maluti, there will be debates surrounding how anybody working with mushrooms internationally should allocate any kind of reciprocity initiatives. I mean, this is something that I know because I've been personally involved with it. I spent years working in a lab studying new psychedelics that had no connection to traditional knowledge. These were completely synthetic things that I had invented. They didn't exist anywhere in the world before I made them. But I remember presenting at a conference and people saying, well, what are you giving back to the indigenous community? How much of your profit? I want you to give 15% of your profits to the indigenous people of the world. And, you know, part of me in principle agrees with this idea, but the issue is the logistics of even doing something like this. First of all, nothing that I was doing made any profit to share. That's probably the most important thing, is I wasn't making any money or selling anything. And so there's nothing to share from those compounds. They also weren't connected to traditional knowledge. But then even assuming I had been doing work with psilocybin, where do you begin with something like that? And I actually gave this example saying, you know, there's evidence of traditional use in Uganda. What about the potential traditions that exist in Africa surrounding this? What about the potential Native American traditions? What about potential traditions with white people in the United States that also contributed dramatically to this? I mean, there's even some kind of very sketchy evidence that there could have been a recognition of psilocybin containing mushrooms among dairy farmers in Florida predating Wasson's discovery. This is a kind of fringe, but it's not impossible to imagine. Even, you know, could a dairy farmer in Florida have picked some mushrooms off a cow patty and realized, hey, these things do something remarkable in the early 20th century? Of course.
Sure.
In fact, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if something like that had happened. And so this is to say that there isn't one tradition, and we're learning more and more that these mushrooms are a sort of internationally distributed part of our human heritage, and trying to connect ownership of the mushrooms to any particular group, whether or not it's right, is going to be an incredibly and increasingly difficult task.
If you're looking for a kratom product, allow me to recommend Top Tree Herbs and New Brew Kratom Kava Green Tea Seltzer. Both are third-party tested. These are pure products that I can personally recommend. New Brew is a delicious carbonated Kratom Kava green tea seltzer. And if you're looking for a nice, a simple, tasty Kratom tea, go for Top Tree Herbs. This is your health. You should get something that's tested. You can get 15% off using the promo code Hamilton. Thank you, Top Tree Herbs and New Brew, for your sponsorship.
I'm in complete agreement. I think it's an interesting one when you try and boil it down to like, who was the first? Who was the first nation or the first tribe to use mushrooms, and why aren't we giving credit to them? And it's impossible. But one thing that we try and do at our company is try our hardest to be a force for good at all times. And we're not going to get it right entirely, but just trying is half the effort. You know, if an industry does take off in Lesotho and people can start to showcase this history and this use and bring tourists there, that's a wonderful thing. That's a really extraordinary thing that now they get to tell their story. And with my research, I've always tried to just be the mouthpiece. It's not my book to write. I'm just the mouthpiece for it. And if it's going to grow legs and take off and become something extraordinary that gets to feed mouths and bring people from all over the world to that area, that's a wonderful thing. That, yeah, it's going to be difficult to do it properly, but I think human beings are inherently good. What I believe. I try and live my life with a lot of kindness and a lot of compassion, and people are going to want to do good things, and we're going to mess up along the way, but we're going to try our hardest, and we might not figure it out immediately, but there's going to be reciprocity and there's going to be profit sharing. It might not be exactly perfect at first, but it will find balance. So yeah, just to backtrack a little bit, just about, sharing information. You said that you traveled all around and you would be taken to these tribal settings and got to witness like the Iboga rituals that happened. And the general consensus was one of welcoming and hospitality. And I experienced the exact same thing. I was met with a lot of kindness. And that in part because the people that I was meeting with are generally much older. The healers and diviners are, for the most part, over 40, over 50 years of age. And their understanding is that they want to spread this information, and they're very fearful that it will die with them. So not all the healers in a settlement know everything. So if I went to a village and the village was 2,000 people strong or whatever it was, you would maybe have 3 or 4 healers inside of that village. And you can go to 3 of those and they will know nothing about mushrooms. And the 4th one will know a lot about mushrooms, and he will specialize in mushrooms. And he would have learned from his grandfather before him or his grandmother, whoever taught him. But unfortunately, a lot of young people are moving away from the villages and they're moving towards cities. There's a mass exodus from the village life in the more rural areas, like the Ciskei and the Transkei and up in Mpumalanga, and people are moving to Johannesburg and Cape Town, and they're leaving behind this amazing knowledge and sort of shunning it in a sense for more Western life. So there is a massive fear from the elders that this is going to be lost. So I'm usually met with a lot of kindness, and they take me in and they're very willing to share and very willing to provide some insight, and even go so as far as like to give me recipes, which is quite a unique thing to actually like jot down how they're making it and how they're doing certain things, what are they putting into it. So yeah, I think the more people that go into this field and record the ethnobotanical or ethnofungal use of these things, the better, because we're going to preserve them for the annals of time so that people can learn about this in the future when these healers aren't around anymore and I'm not around anymore. So I think overall it's a good thing. I think it's a really good thing, and I met with a lot of grace from these people.
I think it is as well, and it's kind of shocking to me that has become such a controversial stance, because Well, you could say that there isn't a reciprocity with the Mazatec people. The reality is that the rituals of Maria Sabina created a industry where enormous amounts of money were made by people coming to that city wanting to experience psychedelics. I mean, it's all over the city. There's mushrooms painted on the taxi cabs and on the walls of restaurants. As big a part of Wautla as cheese is in Wisconsin. It's kind of the official. There's a giant statue of a mushroom as soon as you.
I know that. That's so cool.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool, and there's a huge amount of pride in it, and in understanding that this has brought money and has brought prestige to an otherwise very impoverished indigenous region in a pretty isolated mountain town. So I think that has been a good thing, even though terrible things happened to Maria Sabina. I think it's a kind of typical situation that you encounter in drug history where the problems of prohibition are blamed on the drugs themselves. So there was a lot of pressure to crack down on the counterculture, on hippies in Mexico. It was clear that there was international tourism to go to Huautla to have this experience. And Maria Sabina was at the center of all of it. So she was arrested, and she also made a lot of money off of it. So people in the town got jealous of her. It was a big headache. And you could make an argument, and many have, that Wasson did something unethical by even disclosing the nature of his experience or taking photographs of her or anything like that. But I think a lot of the hardship that she encountered, that Wasson had done something bad, it was that there was a prohibitionist government that wanted to interfere with mushrooms, and that anytime there's a financial, economic inequality in a small community like that, it's going to create social tension. I actually think that, I don't know if you know this story, but Albert Hofmann, after isolating and synthesizing psilocybin, went to Huautla to give Maria Sabina synthetic psilocybin tablets in a sort of direct exchange to say, you gave us mushrooms, we give you the fruits of our knowledge and our labor. And I think there's a really beautiful symmetry in that exchange, especially because no one really made money off of psilocybin anyway.
Didn't she take it and she said that it was the same spirit, or it felt the same, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes, that was what was reported by Hofmann. And I love that story. I think it's
so nice.
Kind of and you don't really hear about that very often because it doesn't fit into this moralizing framework about how terrible it was that this happened. But I really think that the net effect of this was positive for everyone involved, even though there were these unfortunate aspects. It allowed documentation of her poetry, of her rituals. It allowed the field of ethnomycology to progress by leaps and bounds. It may have revolutionized psychiatry. I mean, it's the full potential of psilocybin has yet to be realized, but it's in phase 3 and phase 2 clinical trials simultaneously. And if things go according to plan, it will be approved by the FDA. So I think that all of this is a good thing that has not extracted any wealth or resources from the community that introduced this knowledge. But that's maybe a controversial take.
I think it's a great take. I'm in agreement that we haven't seen the full fruits from this just yet. I mean, for anyone that's tried mushrooms, they are incredible at making, not all the time, some people are quite resistant, but incredible at making better human beings. I had an amazing experience when I was 21. I've only taken mushrooms 3 times. The second time was nothing happened. But the first and the last time were both life-changing experiences, and they made me a better person, and I would hope that they do the same for other people. And that is in part due to Maria and her work and shedding light on it and bringing it to the Western world. So maybe in 100 years' time, the world will be very different. Perhaps we'll be living in a space with a lot more compassion. I don't know, maybe people will struggle with depression a little bit less. Maybe there'll be alternatives for them to try because of it. And perhaps even then the psychedelics in general will be seen as not so detrimental to human existence. Perhaps we've used them for thousands and thousands of years, and there's a reason for that we're supposed to. So all of these things are catalysts that help each other in telling the story of man. And that will go down in history as a pivotal point, I think, for the human race. So there's many, many pivotal points, but that will definitely go down as one of them. I think it was a great thing that happened. Might not have been perfect, but that's only because man got involved, and our greed and whatever else there was that didn't take away from the good that did happen. There was a lot of good that did happen in and amongst the bad.
Yeah. And then there was one paper that was co-authored by Gaston Guzman that came out in 2014 that was really the main piece of scientific literature before your recent publication suggesting a tradition of psilocybin-containing mushroom use. This was the paper where they identified the species Psilocybe congolensis, and they described a family in Uganda that had a sort of traditional family crest with an image of a mushroom that looked like Psilocybe cubensis. And although, unlike your paper, there was no direct observation of any traditions associated with psilocybin-containing mushrooms, the feeling, the speculation from that paper suggested that there could be a tradition in Uganda. Is there other information like that, other pieces of this historical tapestry relating to psilocybin-containing mushrooms in Africa that you think are worth sharing, or other things that you encountered while researching this work?
I would love to tell you about it, because this is probably the most interesting part of all of my work. And you got to hold onto your hat for a second. It will probably take like half an hour, but I'm going to tell you an extraordinary story. And it was a wonderful thing to stumble into. It's so funny because I don't plan out my life to the T. I just let it happen. And for the most part, it's happened really well. And this was one of those experiences that just happened really wonderful. So just to quickly tell you just another interesting use of paniolus pans.
Yeah.
There's various pans in South Africa as well, and some of them psychedelic, cyanescence being one of them. And in the Eastern Cape, there was I spoke to one healer, and he told me the funniest story. He said that at horse races, how crazy is this? I didn't get to actually see it happening, but he did tell me that this is what they were using it for. At horse races, if you want your horse to win, you grind up these paniolus mushrooms and you make a snuff out of it and blow it up the horse's nose, and it will make them run faster, which I thought was such an interesting thing to do. And there's so many of these little tidbits of information. So when I say I've traveled thousands of kilometers and spoken to hundreds of different healers, I've got the most crazy, wonderful stories to tell people. All of this basically culminates, which I'll tell you in a second about it. But the last 5 years have been geared towards me writing a book, which I've titled The Lost Muti. And this next part will sort of show why I think that it's very interesting that it perhaps could be a lost history of mushroom use in Southern Africa. So that paper that you're speaking of, Guzman, and that crest on the house, that one was so interesting. I loved reading that. The interesting thing, though, is that there's not much hard proof in, Southern Africa, but then Africa, there's Sicily in Algeria, I think it's called, where you've got some rock art and some interesting stuff. But just in general, Africa, the current understanding of mushroom use here is very rudimentary. There's not much at all. But like we spoke about earlier, South America and Siberia and ancient Greece. I don't know, have you read Brian Murarescu's book, The Immortality Key?
Yes, certainly.
Great book, awesome book. So we've got mushroom use all around the world, but really not much for South Africa. So in doing this research and speaking to all of these healers, there was overarching narrative that every one of them had learned from people before them. The knowledge was always passed down. And I thought to myself, how far back does it go? And I wanted to try and find some proof that this is a little bit more ancient than we currently think it is. So I thought, our people aren't writing people. They didn't document in the written word, but what they did do is they did paint. So, I set out on this 5-year journey, and in the middle of it, I was like, ooh, could I try and find ancient mushroom use in Southern Africa? And my thought was, let's go to the rock art. So I sifted through several rock art archives, and in total, I was calculating it was well over 200,000 images that I eventually sifted through. And I found something really extraordinary. All around the world, there's a handful, several dozen rock art depictions of potential mushrooms in the rock art. And up until now, I thought there was nothing in South Africa. And I sifted through these archives and I found hundreds of depictions, like well over 300 depictions of potential mushrooms in our rock art archives. The most extraordinary thing of people holding these mushrooms and exalting them, like lifting them up to the sky and putting them in their mouths. And I was just absolutely blown away. I'd love to show you photos at some point in time. I don't know if we can share screens, but I think it would really fascinate you, because the Mayan people, and I think it was the Toltecs. I don't know if the Aztecs as well. I need to get that fact straight, but there was a lot of documentation of psilocybe use there. I think I have as much, if not more, proof that Southern African tribal people have been using psilocybe mushrooms or psychedelic mushrooms to access transcendental spaces for thousands of years, potentially well over 10,000-year-old rock art depictions.
I would love to see this.
Might have to just email you some stuff if you want to check it out via email. That might be best.
Yeah, I would love to see it, because, there's, of course, the very famous Algerian cave painting of the bee man that was used by Terence McKenna as evidence of traditional African psychedelic use. But one issue with mushrooms is that they also look like arrows. They also look like penises. They also look like a pestle. They're a thing that could be many other things. And one of the unintentionally funny aspects of the history of this analysis of religious iconography and cave paintings is that it's almost there's a hallucinatory element to the way people interpret it. They are seeing mushrooms everywhere. And that's not to say that there aren't traditional depictions of psychedelic plants and fungi. There definitely are, but it's a sort of, I see it as a rabbit hole that people get really sucked into. So yeah, I would love to see what you've found, because I simultaneously don't doubt that there are such depictions and have seen so many absurd arguments.
With the things that I've found, I'm definitely biased. I do lean towards wanting them to be mushrooms, but I have to collect myself very often and be like, can this hold up to scrutiny? Other people see mushrooms in what I've found. And this, what I'm going to show you, is just a hypothesis, and depictions that I've found go well into the hundreds. So there's so much. And even if 80% of them aren't fungi, I still have dozens and dozens of artworks that, will rival that of the bee shaman, I think it was, or the mushroom shaman in Algeria.
Oh yeah, I know.
Can you still see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Let's go on a little bit of an adventure. It's just busy loading quickly, so it might just take a few moments. This is actually what the mushroom looks like. This was my findings. This was the day that I found it in 2021, when I still had longer hair. So yeah, very cool looking little psilocybe. So like I said, I was going through the rock art archives. Various different universities have different archives, and I sifted through well over 200,000 images. And I was so just like zoned out, because it takes a very long time, and I probably missed a couple of things, but I think that I got a good majority of it. So my idea around looking at the rock art was I wanted to just try and find some understanding of whether our people here in Southern Africa did use mushrooms in the distant past. The use of plant material is very, very well documented. Our sangomas and the access that we have to really powerful plants in traditional medicine is very well known and documented and written about, but nothing for the mushrooms. So I knew that there was some rock art of some herbs and roots and various different plant material, and I wanted to set out to try and see if I could find some rock art. So I started off, I wanted to see if I could find people holding various different things. And I found quite a few different depictions of people holding the most obscure little organisms with these slender stipes. I also might stop myself for a second here just to explain again, like I could be biased and lean towards a certain direction. So I'm actually going to put it to you and you let me know what you think some of these things look like. Some of them are really interesting because they put them towards their mouths. And I don't know what that means, but let's go on an adventure together. So as you can see here, we've got these like stipes coming down with a cap. It's usually quite pointed, sometimes rounded over, but very often similar size, these things that they're holding. So I was like, okay, I can find people holding these mushrooms. Can I find, if they are mushrooms, can I find potentially people picking them from the ground? Because that would, be a unanimous or fairly unanimous understanding that these things are growing from a certain location, growing from the ground. So I wanted to try and find if I could find people sort of bending over, and I looked through the rock art archive and I found some depictions of people usually hunched over like this. And if you look here at the bottom right, this guy is hunched over and he's leaning towards something with, again, a stipe and a cap. And this guy's got something in his hand with like a stipe and a cap and stipe and a cap up here, but nothing hard evidence. And, for the universities and for academic literature and papers, if you want to write anything, you need some really hard evidence. So this wasn't really going to cut it, but it is interesting. And I set out to find a little bit more. So could I find some engravings, perhaps, something that was like etched into the rock that couldn't disappear over time? That is what I found. So this little one over here is really awesome. It's got this, again, a slender stipe and a cap. In the Kalahari, where these engravings were found, you find quite a few of these stalked puffballs. They sort of don't have these caps that conk out or that flatten out. They hold their spores within a sac, which is quite interesting. But right here on the side, there's this little engraving over here, which again has like a stipe and an arrowhead, but it doesn't really resemble arrows. So I was like, okay, this is very cool, but again, it's not going to really hold up to scrutiny. Can I find any more? If perhaps our people were using psychedelic mushrooms, because that was the thing that really interested me. I had read, around the same time, I had read an amazing book by, he gets a lot of flack, Graham Hancock. I don't know if you're familiar with Graham Hancock. He gets a lot of flack from the academic world. I love his work. He wrote a book called Supernatural, which was a really eye-opening book on various different cultures that used psychedelic substances to access altered states of consciousness. And the book mainly went into the hypothesis that people were using a psychedelic plants or mushrooms to access these spaces, and they documented them in the rock art. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to find a psychedelic mushroom in the rock art, for the most part, they come from cattle droppings. So I tried to look for some cattle, and every now and again, I'd find people pointing towards the cattle or the buck. And the strangest thing was that I would find depictions of cattle droppings. They usually just depicted with the cows as like circles, black circles. And every now and again, I would find these black circles with these things popping out of them at the top. And for me, if I was like an ancient hunter-gatherer and I wanted to document where these substances were coming from, I was going to try and, preserve it in the records, and I would show exactly where they were coming from. I'd put them with the cattle, which the cattle were reared. The people would travel with the livestock. And Terence McKenna's amazing book, Food of the Gods, speaks into this about, moving with the bovine and picking mushrooms from the manure. So I've started to find these amazing little depictions of these circles with these things popping out of the top. But again, it wasn't like anything too robust that I could hedge my ideas against. As you can see, I'm trying to put it up to scrutiny.
On the previous slide, there was a really amazing one, but it looked like it was a painting.
So this is a rendition. This is a painting that was made. I was trying to showcase over here how even in the renditions that were made by researchers, they would sometimes render these images with the things that were present in the image, they had every reason to sort of leave it out or make it something that looked a little bit more common to what was depicted in the rock art. But even the renditions that people made had these interesting little stipes with these caps that these human beings were holding. So I've got another one where this actually comes from. I didn't put it
Yeah,
in the slide, and it looks exactly the same as this, which is very cool. I can send that to you in email if you do want to see it.
because that might be the single most convincing image I've ever seen.
No, it gets better. It gets so good, man. This is so cool. Just check this out. So as I went on, I wanted to try and find, in Graham's book and in various cultures all around the world, they speak about these medicine bags that the shamans or the sangomas would carry with them. And that's quite a common practice in South Africa as well, where the healers would carry these bags with them. And in Supernatural, the book, he speaks about potentially that these bags would be the things that they would carry the sacraments in, the psychedelic material that they would carry would be stored inside of these bags. So I was trying to find, could I find these bags? And I did find many depictions of bags. And in some of them, I found bags that had these things popping out of the top, which aren't often depicted like this, with these slender stipes with these rounded tops coming out of the bag, like here. And I would often find people with bags in the vicinity and people holding, again, little representations of what could be mushrooms, but nothing was hard and fast that was like a definite to me. I needed something really solid. And that's when I stumbled upon the idea of a therianthrope. You know, a man or a shaman that's accessing these transcendental spaces. In order to do that, they would have to become half man, half animal. And this was to signify that they were going into the spirit world or into this place where humans don't usually dwell. You would have to transform into this. Have you heard of this theory, this idea?
No.
Okay, so in order to access the spirit world, humans on their own can't get there. So when the Sangoma would access it, they would transform into a half man, half animal, and often these are depicted as like lions or elephants, sometimes even birds or fish. It just depends on the different culture that's used. So I wanted to try and find a therianthrope, which would be a Sangoma in the spirit world, in the trance world, like transcendental space, because this would be a crossing over where they would be going into the space. And could I perhaps find what would have led them into the space? And I think I found just that. So check this out. I found this over here. I'm going to zoom in for a second. I found this man holding something over here with a slender stipe and a pointed cap. You see that there?
Yes.
And this is called the crocodile people, this depiction. And it's believed that these crocodile people are in the spirit world. They've transformed. It's a therianthrope accessing the spirit world. And I went off to the side of this panel, and as I looked, I found this crocodile man right over here, and in his hand, a clear depiction of what looks like a stipe and a cap. I don't know if you can see that there.
Oh, I can see it. This is incredible.
It's cool, right?
You are legitimately blowing my mind right now.
Amazing. I've got more, Hamilton. I've got more. So it gets even better. So I was like, oh,
this is so good.
It's cool. It's so cool.
Especially after a life of seeing some really questionable stuff. I am just, how has nobody observed what you are showing me right now?
I promise you, there's no one picking up the mantle here in South Africa. There's very few. Let me rather say there are very few people that are picking up the mantle to explore this side of our history. And I'm hoping that my research will do that, and we'll speak into it after this because it's very, very interesting and people can get involved. I actually need people to get involved because it's a joint story that we're telling. Again, I'm just the mouthpiece for it. So we need as many people involved. So this therianthrope, this half man, half crocodile, potentially he has accessed the trance state, the psychedelic state, and perhaps the people of this area were trying to show us what they were using to get into this space. Perhaps it was a mushroom, as you can see him here holding it, and this man, before he's a crocodile, exalting it, holding it up to the sky. So I was like, this is so cool. Could I find potentially more depictions of therianthropes? And I found like these rabbit people over here with these long ears and these things, this long stipe with this bulbous cap at the top. Here, someone picking something and putting it into his mouth with, again, a long stipe and a circle at the top there. And he's putting it right into his mouth over there. And this one over here, which is just very unique to me, it's these people sitting down, completely seated, but they are potentially flying off or moving off into another space, but they're completely seated. And right here, we see something in this man's hand or woman's hand, I don't know, and it's got a concave upper surface. And if you know anything about mushrooms, you know that they do concave as they get older. And right here, he's got an open little mouth. And to me, there's nothing else. Like, I've seen so many depictions of arrowheads. I've seen so many depictions of rattles and shakers, and these do not look like them. As you can see, his hand is holding it right here, and it's going past his hand. Potentially a long stipe. Potentially this is a mushroom. They're trying to show us. I don't know. Again, it's like, I'm just trying to write the hypothesis here. What were they trying to show us? So I needed some more. So this sort of told the story to me of potential psychedelic mushroom use. And I was like, okay, if our ancient ancestors here in South Africa did use mushrooms, did they potentially revere them? Was there any worship of mushrooms? Potentially, I don't know. And I knew of the Kalahari Bushmen, the San people, and they do use a mushroom in their day-to-day practices. They use the Kalahari truffle, the ngaba, they call it. And this mushroom has mythology centered around it, which we found. And this mythology, it speaks to a very, very sacred being called the lightning bird or the thunderbird. And this bird flies over the Kalahari and brings the rain with it. If you're out in the deserts, you definitely need the rain. So you would worship something that brings the rain. But more so than the rain, what the Kalahari Bushmen worship are the thunderbird's eggs that it lays. And with the rain, they find these little truffles peeking up through the desert landscape. And they believe that these are the eggs of thunderbird, these Kalahari truffles. So they do revere mushrooms. And I was like, okay, if I'm a hunter-gatherer, I'm going to revere a few things, potentially something that would alter my consciousness, but also food is very scarce. So potentially I would revere something that feeds me and my family. So I wanted to try and find another use case of humans interacting with mushrooms in a mythological setting. So I found this really interesting story about these things called formlings. And formlings are often depicted as like a circle or like a squiggly line. And it turns out through many amazing researchers before me that after speaking to these San Bushmen, that the formlings are actually termite mounds. And the termite mound is interesting because one of the supreme deities, it comes from this termite mound. This is what they believe. And for any mycologist, this perks up your ears immediately because there's an amazing mushroom that grows out of termite mounds called termitomyces. Here in South Africa, we get umkowane, termitomyces umkowane. And if you've tried it, it's probably like top 3 tastiest mushrooms in the world. It's so delicious. And I wanted to try and see if I could find a formling first and foremost. And I found some. And then I found this formling over here. Now, you're going to have to suspend your disbelief just for a second because we're going to start at the beginning again because I'm going to try and tell this story. So I found this formling, and it's this circle depiction over here. And I found this lady over here bending down towards this formling. A lot of her face has been washed away or eroded, but she's bending down towards this formling. This tapestry is a massive tapestry, and this formling is right at the center of it. It's right at the heart of it. And out of the top of this formling, we see these things with these stipes coming up out of it, or these lines, and a potential concave cap with these wings, if you see that. Now, it doesn't look very convincing to me just yet, but it perked up my attention. I was like, this is cool. Let me dig a little bit deeper. And I've been lucky thus far. Maybe I can find something else. So I went a little bit deeper and I looked at some termitomyces references, and this is what it looks like. Is it updating for you on that side?
Yes.
Okay, so termitomyces, beautiful long stipe that goes into the termite mound, and it's usually covered in soil or dirt, like here. And when it grows, the cap conks out like this, and it flattens, and then usually has these concave wings over here. However, it also does remain in its sort of uncapped out version where it just stays as like a ball at the top. And this is what it looks like. It's a really tasty mushroom. So I wanted to try and find this mushroom in the rock art. And I found some depictions, but they weren't close. They potentially looked a little bit like, I don't know what, we call them knopkiris in South Africa. It's like something that you would hit someone else with, or like protect yourself. Like a club, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I did find some other formelings with these things going down into it, but again, they weren't like hard and fast for me. So I went to one of the most sacred sites in Brandberg, and this is called the White Shaman, or the White Sangoma, we call it. It's a tapestry or depiction of things that the hunter-gatherers would find of importance. And I found these various cattle in here. You have people hunting, you have tribal setting, and you have this white sangoma at the center. He's white because he's covered in clay. And then just off to the right, I found this man over here. And in his hand, he's holding two very interesting looking objects to me. And I went a little bit closer, and this is another depiction of it. You can see a little bit better. I'll show you another one. But this depiction shows very clearly two things coming down, two sort of slender pieces coming down with black at the bottom, and a cap or a potential top part that is sort of cylindrical, bulbous at the top, and it's pointed. It's got like a pointed umbo at the top. And I found some early renditions of this rock art, and in the early renditions, they paint them really beautifully, quite intricately. And to me, if I look at it, this looks eerily similar to potential termitomyces mushroom, with this long slender stipe and this brown black part going down into the termite mound with a pointed umbo at the top. And what this tells me is that perhaps there's a story to be told here, that perhaps the history of South Africa is interwoven with more mushroom use than we gave it credit for. Perhaps there's a story to be told here that our people did use mushrooms in the past. Perhaps they even revered them. Perhaps they even used them to access transcendental spaces. And I'm going to show you one more. This is probably the most important artwork that I found. This is called Diana's Vow, this next one. And what it shows is the king, the chief of the village. And the chief is right at the top of the depiction. And it shows everything of importance to sort of village life, which is community and hunting and gathering. And right at the top, we've got this king laying down. He's wearing a sable mask. He's revered, sort of like a pharaoh. He's got a lot of clothing on him with beautiful ornate decorations on him. Potentially he's died. This is what the thinking is. And in this depiction, it shows his hand very normally. He's got a normal hand, he's got normal feet, but his right hand, for some reason, curves up to the top. And right at the top of it, it's got this flattened underside with this rounded top bulbous object. I don't know what it is, but to me, it looks eerily similar to a mushroom. Why on earth would our people depict village life and right at the top put the chief, and potentially growing out of his hand or coming from his hand, depiction of a mushroom? I don't know what that looks like to you. It looks like a mushroom to me.
Looks like a mushroom to me. But then my question would be, because when I was in the DRC, I observed enormous quantities of these giant termitomyces being sold on the side of the road.
Yep.
And I thought, wow, I never realized that there's this massive culture of consuming these mushrooms. I'd never even seen the species before. What do you think about the possibility that mushrooms were part of this tradition, but maybe not psilocybin containing mushrooms, maybe culinary mushrooms, or maybe there's a reverence for the mushroom that is separate from the visionary qualities? Is there particular evidence?
Why one over the other? I think just like modern day humans, we find everything fascinating. There's some people that find entomology fascinating, and some people that like technology, and some people that like edible mushrooms, and some people that like psychedelic mushrooms. Why not all of it? Like this last depiction, this last slide, to me doesn't look like termitomyces. This looks like just a conventional mushroom shape, whereas the previous ones look like termitomyces. Perhaps they revered some gourmet mushrooms because they provided sustenance, like the ngaba and the Kalahari truffle, and potentially termitomyces. Perhaps some of them were revered because they helped with cancer treatments or skin cancer, like Podaxis, Slankop, we call it. Or perhaps there were some that were revered because they allowed you to see what others didn't see. And some of the rock art that I found, I've got some other amazing ones that I would love to show you. I'll send you some photographs of them that are so obviously mushrooms. These are just some that I put in this presentation. There's hundreds and hundreds, engravings and paintings in ochre and various different things. I think that for it to be so widely depicted must mean that there was some use of mushrooms here in South Africa. I don't know what it was for. I don't have the answers entirely, but perhaps we can just open up the story and continue to tell it. So all in all, sorry, I'm waffling here a little bit, but all in all, the whole point of all of this is I've been trying to document as much as I can into a book, which I've called The Lost Muti. And muti meaning medicine. Muti can mean medicine, or it could also mean psychedelic. It just means like a powerful plant or mushroom. And all of this culminates in me trying to put this book together. And in order to do that, we're going to try and need some help from the community. So we're putting a website together just to garner some traction and attention. And very soon, probably within the next 2-3 weeks, we're going to put a Kickstarter together so that we can actually go and document a lot more. Me and my team can go and document a lot more and actually go and view some of these places and just get out there a little bit more. Because up until now, it's been entirely self-funded by myself, all the plane trips and petrol to get to places, which has been extraordinary. But I wish that I would have completed this much sooner, because it's an amazing story to tell and I want people to hear about it. But yeah, it would allow it to be done a lot quicker if we can get people to rally behind us in making it happen.
And I'll, of course, post a link to that and any other information that you want listeners to be aware of.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting. The book also outlines things that I wanted to show you, which is golden statuettes. I don't know if you've ever heard of Mapungubwe before.
No.
So Mapungubwe is called the Golden City. It's up near Limpopo. And the archives are owned by the Witwatersrand University, if I'm not mistaken. And this place is extraordinary. It was, as far as I remember, I think it's on the banks of Limpopo and Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe has an amazing story to tell about fungi as well. I've collected quite a bit of information from there, and Mozambique and all sorts of different places. But this particular area was quite unique. There was a lot of people living there at one point in time, quite a large civilization. And the civilization had access to gold. And they traded the gold. Great Zimbabwe traded their gold to many, many places. There was a seaport there, if I'm not mistaken. And Mapungubwe has gone down in history as one of these ancient civilizations that just vanished, essentially. But what they left behind was golden statuettes of rhinos and golden statues of various animals and buttons and scepters and walking sticks and all sorts of different things. The funniest thing that I didn't expect to find, I mean, I was hoping that I would, but I also found golden statuettes of mushrooms as well, perfectly created golden statuettes of little mushrooms, large mushrooms, tiny little ones. And I think this harkens to the widespread use of mushrooms in Zimbabwe as well. There's a lot more use of mushrooms, a lot less fear. A lot of younger people in South Africa have a fear for mushrooms from the villages. Zimbabwe doesn't have that. So potentially this ancient civilization of Mapungubwe also had a reverence for mushrooms and showed that in the statuettes that they created. So yeah, there's so much to discover here in South Africa. Some really interesting tidbits of knowledge.
Wow. This is just all so amazing. I'm very excited for everything that you're doing. And I think that this is going to be a really groundbreaking project that will redefine the history of psychedelics. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, it's a joint project with many, many different individuals involved, people much smarter than myself, helping with the taxonomy, some people helping with the chemistry side of things, because what we've tried to do, we've done it on a very small scale, but every mushroom that we find and we speak to, or I say we, but it's mainly me, when I go and speak to these people about the uses of these mushrooms, that we try and get them tested and see what is the benefit for like the uses that they're touting for these mushrooms in the traditional sense. Is there some scientific proof that we can garner from this by looking at the compounds and their antiviral effects? Like, to give you an example, it's an amazing fruit called the wild plum here. It's Hopophyllum, I think it is, Caffrum, if I'm not mistaken. Hopophyllum is the name. And it's the wild plum. It's an amazing, massive tree. The most extraordinary thing was told to me. I'm actually going to go and view it now in the summertime when it happens again. But often when the harvesters are walking through the forest, they'll walk past the Harpophyllum, like the wild plums on the ground. They'll just walk past them. And I've eaten them. They're quite tasty. They don't have a lot of flesh, but they're quite tasty. The skin is quite tart, but they leave them on the ground. And I was like, why are you doing this? Why aren't you taking them? And it turns out that they'll go back to them and they'll inspect them when they're covered in a white mold, and they take them back to the village. And often these fruits are scraped, the skin is scraped, the white sort of fur, they call it, is scraped off and applied to wounds. And I'm so curious as to what is this white fur that's growing on it? What type of fungus or mold is growing, and does it have any antibiotic or antiviral properties to it? And yeah, there's so many cool little anecdotal stories to be told here, but we need to combine the science with it so that we get a full understanding of the knowledge of these people, because our people are incredibly wise. Yeah, it just hasn't been documented yet.
And you mentioned that you have taught yourself a lot of this. I think people often contact me and they have this hyper-credentialist concept of scientific research or anthropology, and they'll say, well, what kind of graduate degrees do I need in order to study mushrooms? And of course, I would never suggest that somebody shouldn't pursue formal education in these matters. But at the same time, so much of this work has been done by people who are guided primarily by curiosity and are self-taught, Alan Rockefeller being probably one of the best examples. So just out of curiosity, how old are you? And is this just something that you just were able to do all of this pretty much without any specialized training?
So I'm 29. I'm going to have my 30th birthday in 2 months. We're celebrating by walking through the Transkei, the homeland of Madiba. Beautiful, beautiful place. So yeah, I'm turning 30 in October. I was really fortunate to find out at 21 that I didn't want to do the grind. I didn't want to sit in traffic every single day. I was doing it, and I thought that it was the life for me. And I was making good money and moving up the ladder and potentially making a name for myself in that field, working corporate. And it was actually mushrooms, believe it or not. I had my first mushroom experience, and it just opened me up entirely. And I went to work the following week, and I said to my boss that I'm leaving, and this was it. And I left that same day. I didn't get paid out my final salary. I just knew that I was going to do more, that I wanted to do more. Since about 22, it's just been an amazing journey. I started a company with my co-partner, my romantic partner at the time. We still run the company together. It's called Ether Apothecary. And we started off very humbly, like making rudimentary extracts in our kitchen on the stovetop, and then quickly moving to the Eastern Cape. And, I got to spend those pivotal years in the forest learning about mushrooms, teaching myself and reading as much as I can, and learning how to find the things that I wanted to find, to distinguish them, and how to, find them in the wild. And, with our company, learning how to extract properly and how to actually run proper lab equipment. And all of that has now resulted in us becoming authorities in South Africa for medicinal mushroom extracts. We run an amazing laboratory where we do phenomenal ultrasonic assisted subcritical extraction. I get to pretend I'm a chemist and get to extract stuff and look at it and see, if we apply heat here or pressure here, what's the extraction, how much better will it be? How much worse will it be? So all of this has been self-taught just because it's interesting to me. And at some point in time, my journey will probably shift into theology, because I love theology, and I'll leave behind mushrooms. At some point in time, I might just become a poet. I have no idea, but it's exciting, and I love what I do, and I get to do it with the most extraordinary people. So I have a blessed life. I have a wonderful, wonderful life, and people seem to respect us, which we also don't take for granted. There's a lot of love for our customers and a lot of love for the people that we get to help out. Yeah. And because of that, sorry, last thing I'm going to say, because of that, we also then get to make some really cool things. We get to partner up with some amazing companies to make APIs. Basically our company makes APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients for beverage and food and cosmetics and all sorts of different things. So yeah, it's quite exciting. I get to live an amazing, exciting, wonderful, blessed life. We are thinking about it, not to divulge too much, but we just secured our first investment round for our company after 8 years. We just decided that in order to scale, we should do it properly. And with that, there's leaning towards putting an amazing team together in South Africa of some of the most really amazing people in their fields to really tackle the industry of psilocybin, because no one here has really tackled it yet. We're still completely open market, but we want to do it properly. We want to try and do it in combination with the law and with psychedelic assisted therapy, and look at bringing Maluti to people. So a South African mushroom for South African people. That's the hope. So yeah, all of that is in the pipeline. There's a lot of discussions on that side.
One thing I find really interesting about the history of psychedelics in South Africa is that one of the most publicized examples that's known to people in the United States would be a sort of pseudo-traditional use of 2CB by Xhosa healers. And I was so fascinated by this claim that I went to a place, I think it's now has a different name, but at the time it was called King Williamstown.
Yes.
To interview an anthropologist named Manton Hurst, who had published on this Xhosa use of 2CB. And then when I arrived to talk with him about it, he immediately acknowledged that the entire thing had been fabricated in order to create a sort of pseudo-legal pretext for the sale of 2CB. And I think the idea was that there was maybe some sort of legal exemption or some kind of way that a traditional use of a psychedelic would be regulated differently from a purely synthetic substance. And it's ironic to think that somebody would have invented this fake history of use of a synthetic psychedelic in a country where there may have been the actual oldest tradition of psychedelic drug use.
I would not be surprised to hear that. So interesting. I wonder if they ever found out who fabricated it. But the whole reason being is that our regulations here allow for traditional use cases, is that we have a massive market of indigenous healers that are servicing the impoverished community. Our main sort of line of the majority of people in South Africa live in the poverty line. There's a lot of people that just don't have a lot of money. I think it's, 58 million people or something around there. And the vast majority, I think it's almost 80% of them, are considered in the poverty bracket, that they're really struggling. And their entire medicine need is fulfilled by traditional healers. So as soon as you put a law in place that stops traditional healers from practicing, you sort of take out a large chunk of this informal economy. I think there was an amazing book called Kaisernomics that spoke into this, and how incredible amounts of money is transferred hand to hand in the informal sector. So there is this clause for category D medicines that is in place, that we can use things in a traditional sense. That is basically what's happening at the moment. I've been asked to help participate in one of the high court hearings that's happening at the moment for someone that is being charged with psilocybin, because potentially this paper now showcases for the first time a traditional use case of psilocybin-containing mushrooms, that now it could be scheduled differently. Potentially it could be decriminalized. We don't know. This is all going to plan out or play out in the next couple months. Yeah, I'm speaking to you as all of this is unraveling. It's a very exciting time. So yeah, I hope... it's such an interesting one, because also you do want regulation around things like this. It's very important to have regulation around things like this, because they could also be abused and they can do harm when done incorrectly. I've found, we won't get into that too much, but I think reverence is important. So maybe even a little bit of regulation isn't a bad thing.
Right. And I don't say this to put you on the spot, but I imagine it's going to come up. Have you considered any type of benefit sharing or anything with the group that first taught you about traditional use of Psilocybe maluti?
If we set up an organization to cultivate and to manufacture these mushrooms, then definitely. We do it currently with the Sand Bushmen for Scaletium. There's a benefit share there for them where we give back a nice sizable amount to them. So I would love to do that for as many people as we can. There's amazing use of Withania somnifera in South Africa, the ashwagandha plant. Are you familiar with ashwagandha?
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, and same thing there. Like as a nation, we import huge amounts of ashwagandha from the Vedic countries, but it's a weed or an invasive here in South Africa. It's classified as, and it grows rampant throughout South Africa, and it's used in traditional medicine here quite often. It would be amazing to erect an industry around ashwagandha. I would love to do it for maluti as well. The thing that we are doing at the moment is on African reishi. We're trying to establish an industry here for African reishi. It's been the Ganoderma astroafricanum variety because our local people have been using it for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's so widespread here that you can't walk in the forest without seeing it along the coast, up from the Eastern Cape into KZN. So what we've done is we've taken to getting it Fair Wild certified, so that fair wage practices for the harvesters that we employ, and the benefit sharing can go back to the communities, and we can uplift. We currently support some amazing nurseries in our area. We're a relatively small company, but we're trying. So we would love to do more. I think it's definitely at the top of our list. We're starting with reishi. We will move into maluti as soon as maluti becomes available, and we're not breaking any laws.
This is amazing. Thank you so much for telling me this story. This is, I think, going to be totally fascinating to everyone that listens to it. Are there any final things you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a big thank you again, man. It's been wonderful chatting to you. I hope that we'll stay in contact, because every time I go out into the field, I learn something new, and that might be of interest to someone down the line. The only thing that I would ask, perhaps, is when the website launches and the Kickstarter launches, is that we're trying our hardest as a team, everyone involved, all the researchers and the people that we're giving back to, as much as possible, keep this South African and try and uplift our country. So if anyone sees any of the research and is looking to publish a paper or just run with it quicker than we can, potentially partnering instead. One of our key tenets in our company is partnerships over monopolies. So if you're looking to write about anything that I've spoken about, or maybe do any of the research into this, potential partnerships might be better. I would love to help you out. I'd love to give back to the communities as well. And that only happens if we tell the full story and the proper story. So that would be my only ask.
Sounds great. I'm really excited to hear how all of this develops, and I hope we stay in touch. Please reach out to me anytime. I want to hear more about all this work you're doing. Some of the most amazing work I've heard about in years.
Thanks, Hamilton. Appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.